Today is the day. Wolcen has finally arrived. As of this recording, the game is officially launched, and I wanted to help out by giving you guys some tips and tricks. Kind of a basic overview and guide and just helpful information for beginners. I know a lot of people are probably going to be jumping in today or maybe whenever you happen to click on this video, and I think this is going to be a good introduction and helpful information for just starting out. Now, you should know, of course, this is the second part of a sponsored video series. They asked me to check out the game. I was happy to do so because I was already interested in it. And with that said, let's jump in, let's check out Wolcen and give you guys some tips for getting started. I want to start at the very beginning when you pick your character. Now, it kind of looks like you're picking a class, but you have to know this is by no means a permanent decision. Essentially, when they ask you to pick a role at the beginning during the character creator, all you're doing is picking your starting skill and weapon. This is not important because as your character, you can use any skill in the game and equip any weapon. This decision isn't a permanent decision that's going to affect you at all. It doesn't change your starting attributes. It doesn't change your capabilities and what you have access to or what you're excluded from, because you're not excluded from anything and you have access to everything. So don't be too scared off by the fact that it's asking you to pick a role at the start, because it's really not a big deal. Next, let's go ahead and talk a bit about the game's combat system. So if you don't know, this game's combat revolves around this willpower and rage resource system. Basically, your basic attacks with pretty much every weapon in the game will build up rage and reduce willpower. Now, the one exception to this is staves, which will build up willpower and reduce rage. So the skills in the game are going to require a certain weapon to be equipped in order to use. And then the skills will either consume rage or willpower, kind of depending on the weapon that you have equipped. So basically, combat is revolving around you picking a weapon and then building up with your basic attacks either rage or willpower, and then the abilities you have equipped will either be spending rage or willpower. It's not as complicated as it kind of sounds, but you just need to know the system is kind of freeform. I guess that's the major point. You can use any weapon at any time. You have access to all of the skills. It's just the skills that you can actually have active and using while you're in combat are going to be determined by the weapon that you have equipped, and then you'll build up that resource and spend it. And there's kind of some finesse and balance that you can do. You know, you can build up rage and then spend it, which will then build up your willpower. And if you have a willpower skill that you have access to, you can use that, which will spend the willpower and build up the rage. It's this, again, this toggle, this back and forth. And since we're talking about combat, let's talk about the game's stamina system. The dodge mechanics has you starting off with 4 out of 8 total nodes unlocked, and basically each one of those nodes accounts for 1 dodge roll, and you can spam that dodge roll until it runs out. Now, this will be passively regenerating over time. You can also get gear that will allow you to speed up the regeneration of those nodes, and eventually you can unlock all 8 nodes potentially, depending on, again, the type of gear that you use and the type of character that you're building. Now let's go ahead and talk on skills. This is going to be kind of probably one of the bigger sections of this video because I've got a lot to say here. So the game has over 40 skills in total. Now, as I mentioned earlier with the combat, that's kind of broken up into categories based on weapon types. So there's a category of skills where you can only use melee weapons, and then there's a category for daggers, bows, and pistols, and finally there's a category for staves and catalysts. So depending on the type of weapon that you want to use, this will limit the spells that you can have access to while you have that weapon equipped. Now, I should note with this that there are these catalysts which are combined with the staff skills, and catalysts are a one-hand offhand weapon which will let you combine that with any other category besides the two-handed weapons. So you could use the catalyst and a dagger to have access to use all of the dagger skills as well as all of the catalyst / staff skills. So that again allows for the mixing and matching of the 40 plus skills that are in the game. Now, at any given time you can have 6 equipped skills. It's basically you start off with 1 through 4 unlocked. You'll eventually unlock a 5th slot, and then there is the right click where you can also place a skill. Left click is permanently bound to the basic attack of whatever weapon that you're using, and that basic attack is that resource generator for whatever kind of build that you're doing. So skills are actually dropped in what are known as enaraks. They're going to drop on the ground along with regular loot, and clicking on them in your inventory will teach you any unknown skills. But if you already know the skill, skill, you're actually going to get this thing called Primordial Affinity, which is an in-game currency. Now, Primordial Affinity is a currency that's actually used to accelerate leveling up skills, or you can use it to reset your passive skill tree, which is something I'll talk about later. Now, if you're in need of Primordial Affinity and you happen to be swimming in gold, well, something that you can do is actually buy Enerax from the vendor Demetra in town for gold, and then as long as it's a skill you already know, using it will allow you to get Primordial Affinity instead. So this could let you speed up the leveling process for some skills in exchange for gold, essentially. And since we're talking about Demetra, the in-town vendor for the skill Enerax, pay attention to the fact that she's got this stock of abilities where you can go to learn new skills. So like I was going for the Stav and Catalyst playstyle, kind of the mage build, and there was a lot of skills even after 8 hours that I still hadn't unlocked. So I tried to make sure I was constantly checking up with her inventory, which it does restock on a regular basis. There are timers right in game to show you, and just to make sure that I got access to the skills that I didn't have yet, rather than waiting for the skill to randomly drop while I'm playing, essentially. And again, if you do eventually get a skill that you purchased or that you found previously, just use it and get some of that Primordial Affinity. And you should know as well that skills will be leveling up as you gain experience while they're equipped on your bar. It's worth noting, you don't need to use the skills, they just need to be equipped. And then also, as the skills level up, you unlock these modifiers for them that you can equip on the skills. Now, at its base, there's kind of boring stuff like, hey, it does more damage or reduces the cost. But the further along you go, the cooler they get. And as the skills level up and you can have more equipped at any given time, you can get some things that rather significantly change how the skill works. Like one of my favorites is the oh so cheesy infinite blink ability. I mean, it's not infinite, it requires a lot of resource the more you use it, but you know, blinking across the map is fun in pretty much any RPG. I want to give you some info about the potions too. So the game's got 3 different types of potions. There's health, willpower, and rage. And if you find that you're using your basic attack too often to build your primary resource, try spamming potions. It's a pretty simple tip, but you can really use these fairly liberally. Now they're going to refill as you kill enemies, and it's a pretty quick process. Your potions will refill very fast, so don't be afraid to use your resource potions rather than having to constantly basic attack with whatever equipped weapon that you have. It can also be re-equipped in town. This is a kind of a little cheesy hack, and I don't know how necessary it is, but basically if you re-equip an empty potion, it will fill it up. Again, not entirely necessary, but it's a thing that exists. Also, you can't use potions while you're channeling abilities. So I've got like this little death ray ability that I use pretty often, and I tried to spam potions while I was doing it, but it's not possible. But in between attacks, it can be used. So on the other hand, I was using the Psy Blade ability where it felt like I could spam potions while attacking, but basically what was happening was in between my attacks, the potion was happening. But if you have a channeled ability and you're trying to spam a resource potion, just know it's not going to work. There needs to be a break in casting. I don't know if I love that that's how they do the system in this game, but as of now, that's how it is. And kind of like in a lot of other games like this, you'll find better potions as you go through the game and as your character levels up, so keep an eye out. Or you can also buy them from the vendor in town. And speaking of vendors, let's talk about the town vendors. So the main town of Stormfall has 3 vendors for you to use. There's Xanifer Stark, who is the jeweler, and she's going to sell you gems, and she can also remove gems from any item for the cost of gold. There is Mojave, the merchant, and he will sell you weapons, armor, jewelry, and potions. And finally, Dementia, who we mentioned earlier, is the archivist, and she will sell you skill Enerax, and she can also be used to level up existing skills in exchange for affinity. And now all the items that are sold from vendors are actually restocked on a fairly regular basis, so it's worth checking back in on them. I think, again, especially Demetra, checking back in for skills that you haven't found yet is a pretty good idea while you're getting started with the game. And there's also going to be some merchants that you'll come across out in the wild while exploring. Do check in on these as well, because they do have the tendency to have some pretty high rarity items. How important that is while you're leveling up before you reach max level, I'll leave that up to you whether or not you want to spend gold on that, but just realize it's something that exists. I do want to quickly touch on the Gates of Fate. This is the passive bonus node system in the game. This is where kind of a lot of customization comes. So you'll be leveling up, and as you level up, you gain points to spend in those, and they will give you passive buffs. Now, each section has these 3 larger nodes with some fairly powerful boost. I think it's really important to take note of that and check up on those before you start to go in a direction. Now, you can respec and reskill at any time just for spending some in-game currency. But before you go down too far in a tree, take a look at what those major nodes are, because there's some, again, really powerful ones that might fit the playstyle that you're trying to go for. You can also then turn the gate to adjust your build on the fly. So as time goes on, you level up your character to max level, you'll be branched out in quite a few areas, and if you want to swap your playstyles, it's really as simple as turning the wheel. Every character has access to all the skills, can use all the weapons, can do whatever. And the cool thing as well is that the passive attributes that you level up with you apply to both melee and caster and range. They apply across the board as well. It's really neat. This game gives a lot of flexibility when it comes to playstyle. Just a couple other quick tips I think are worth mentioning. Early on when you're getting started, I think it's worth picking up the white items. At the beginning, they sell for nearly as much as the blue items that are going to drop, and this will help you build up the gold needed to purchase any skills in the early game, or if there's any gear that you really want that you find from vendors, at least initially, until you get to the point where mostly blue and yellow items start dropping. I would start off by, picking up the white items and selling them to vendors. There's also these mini dungeons scattered throughout the game. You'll notice them indicated by the little green stairs on your map. When you go in there, don't just blitz through to the end, because there's always going to be a dungeon objective, and sometimes you could bypass it. Now, the dungeons are fairly small and relatively tight quarters, but it has happened before where I've gone to the end of the dungeon without actually encountering what the objective was. So make sure you complete the objective because you get a really nice reward. That's basically it. I know this isn't like the most in-depth guide, and I'm not touching on end game at all. I think I'm gonna save that for a later date if I continue to play this game, making my way towards max level, going through that end game grind, and hopefully this thing lives up to the hype. So far, it seemed pretty good. And yeah, if you're getting started with this game today, or whenever, hopefully this video and these little bits of tips helped you guys. And with that, we're gonna wrap this up. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video, and until next time, I'll see you later.